G'day and welcome to Doesn't Matter. I always get some of my best insights when I'm training or exercising. And while I was lifting, I was thinking, one of the things that I find really interesting about the sort of capitalist socioeconomic juxtaposition that we find ourselves in today and the massive changes that have occurred over the last 40, 50 years is that relationally, women are becoming, definitely by far the winners of the last 40 years of economic reform, simply because we've lost a lot of our manufacturing in the West at least, and most of the developed and semi-developed world, we've lost most of our manufacturing to the East. We lost a lot of the man jobs to the East, and we would have eventually lost them to automation anyway. So we've become more and more service economies, and as those service economies flourish, women are generally better and more attuned by nature, by their anthropology, towards service jobs. People jobs, human networking, that kind of thing. Women are drawn to that. It's their nature to do that through about 1 million plus years of anthropology and evolution. And they're better at it generally too. So there's plenty of exceptions, all right? But as a general rule, across the broadest populace, yes, it's what they're drawn to, it's what they're better at. Now, that's made them highly successful and even more successful. 2/3 plus of university graduates are now female. Soon it'll be 2 to 1, eventually even 3 to 1 by some projections by 2050. So they're flooding into the professional working space. And doing really well, and that's awesome in some ways. Pros and cons to everything. Every good thing has bad sides to it. Every bad thing has good sides to it almost. So an honest appraisal of these things has to involve an examination of pros and cons, a critical assessment of it. What we're seeing now is that women are hitting 30 to 35 and thinking about having families and stuff, and they have invested their years and their best fertility and most of their youth into career and advancement. There's nothing wrong with that. Plenty of dudes do that. It's great. But there's consequences, and you can't avoid those consequences. And I think what we're seeing increasingly is a polarization of the sexes, of the genders relationally by the socioeconomic structure that they're in. That's a problem, because most of the arguments you see in the red pill community, the feminist community, and all the different battling gender-based stuff, which drives me insane, is argument over nature versus nurture, which is stupid. They both function together. And it's really complex, and we don't entirely understand it yet, but we're getting a good clue nowadays. And they ignore the broader economic context, socioeconomic context that we're all embedded in, and what the consequences of that are. And every time someone raises an issue like that, we pushed billions of women into the workforce 50, 60 years ago, increasingly, and you say that, some people get really upset because they go, what are you trying to say? You're trying to say that women shouldn't be working? And they start panicking and having an emotional collapse about it. No one's suggesting that, except some freaks on the distant extremist side of things. No one's suggesting that at all, so calm down. But it had an effect, a dramatic effect. It pushed us towards a service economy as manufacturing went to the cheaper new international division of labour, drove all the manufacturing jobs to the cheaper Eastern, South Asian, East Asian side. And it has created the imbalances that we have today, where professional ranks are just filling with women, particularly in the service industries and the industries that they're orientated towards. So these women end up being 30 to 35 and still driven by the biological clock. I mean, 90+% of women still want children. Desperately in many cases. And they start hunting for a dude that is their peer, their equal, or better, because this is the nature of female hypergamy. You know, you can't hardly blame them. They're going to be vulnerable to maternity. They're going to be out to some degree out of the workforce, to whatever degree they decide on. They're going to be vulnerable while they're pregnant. There's recovery periods, and that's going to happen at least twice in their life most of the time. So they want someone there to help them out. It's a tough few years. It really is. Been through it myself. And when they look around, they want someone who's at least they consider to be their equal, which in itself has problems because it's what we consider to be equal that is part of the issue here. So they want someone who earns as much or more, someone with similar status of education, but when far less men are in the professional ranks and are earning less money and are less educated, at least formally, you're going to find that they're finding already that there's just there's not a dearth of choices here. There's far fewer choices, and they're going to get worse as time goes by. The priorities that the socioeconomic structure has thrust upon us, job, career, for men and for women, is something that I think we need a long conversation about. I think health is more important. Your physical, mental, and spiritual health is more important. And that should be always a priority. Then the health of your social network and the people in your life that support you and you support. And then the things that make you happy and get up in the morning, the things that are in your life that give your life meaning, hobbies, sports, they need to be a priority above work. Work is a necessity, and it can be your passion too, and it's great when it is. But for most people, it's just work. And children trump even that eventually in most people. So when you want to have children, that'll trump everything. And it will trump it whether you like it or not, because children are kind of there and demanding. They need what they need, and that's it. So a lot of people are getting to that stage where they want them, and they want this shift in the balance that they've pursued since they were 17, and now they're 32. And no one's asking, has the socioeconomic structure I'm in, has it got room for all of this? Does it have room for my fertility window as a woman? Does it give me what I want as a woman or a man? And it's arguable, it's strongly debatable as to whether it does. Certainly a man is being precluded in most cases by a huge percentage of women because he hasn't got a degree. Even though he might still earn reasonable money, he hasn't earned enough. He hasn't got a degree, so his equality is sidelined by socioeconomic differences. Then the women are competing for an increasing number of men who are going to go, well, you come with a work colleagues you spend more time with than you'll ever spend with me. You come with a boss, your work husband or work wife, that has more say over your life than I do. And you have to do what they say, which means they're more powerful in your life than I am. You come with a whole set of complex problems wrapped around your career that we're supposed to have family with. And then when we have children, they will be the priority, and that's an accepted thing by most people, at least if you're going to be decent parents. And who ends up at the bottom of that pyramid? Now, if you talk to sort of red pill, black pill guys, they'll say, oh, the man ends up at the bottom of the pyramid. And that's often the case, true, yes. But increasingly, with working women now, the woman, the mum, ends up at the bottom of the pyramid too. So mum and dad are on their hands and knees bearing the load of the socioeconomic imposition of our structure, which has always occurred, it's nothing new. But it's just somewhat more burdensome in some ways now because we've abandoned all the roles that enabled us to sort of skill match and resource match our group, kin, family, tribe to the demands of the external economy and environment. We don't do that anymore. We can't do that anymore. You know, you have to purchase services to account for any shortfalls. So you've got to pay someone to mow your lawn, pay someone to fix things, pay someone to do things that people 40, 50 years ago did themselves. Because there's no time anymore. Because everyone's grinding. Little worker bees and workarounds. And that is part of the issue. That's a big part of the issue. So this high value husband, the prospective husband, he's not looking at these women who've worked their asses off and built themselves up. He's not looking at them. I wouldn't either. I just wouldn't. And I know, I understand. I find an intelligent younger woman who wanted a family first and foremost, and he would support her. She brings less problems, less complications to his life, and she brings more support. He's not going to be at the very bottom of a steep pyramid. He's just under the kids with her together. He has to deal with his boss, but he doesn't have to also deal with her boss and her stuff. Okay? Now, at some point, she may go back to work. She may start her own career as the kids get older, and that adds another dynamic. But by then, they have built the foundational concrete of a strong, firm relationship. People today are trying to start relationships with no concrete, with no time spent together, with no growth together. From the start, they're grinding, and they're trying to build a relationship while they're grinding, and then have children while they're grinding. I don't know how we think that's supposed to work out. There's only so many, 168 hours in the week, you've got to sleep a third of them. Doesn't leave much when you're working 40 hours a week each as well. Where is the time to build? It's not there. And it doesn't have to be that much more or less to start creating real problems or creating benefit. But that margin needs to change or alter. We do need a shorter working week. That would be a good start. UBIs, things like that. From the progressive side of politics, actually good ideas that are embraced by a lot of the libertarians and centrists as well. We do need things like that to sort of relieve that socioeconomic pressure and give people more choices, okay? And allow them to prioritize their relationships and their families, because at the moment, that's not what we're doing. We're not prioritizing the things that society rests upon. Society doesn't rest upon your job. Everyone is replaceable. Stephen Hawking was replaceable. There were at least a dozen theorists around writing comparable stuff to him during most of his career. Even the most rare of us, even Elon Musk, George Atlassian, there's other guys like him around. Maybe not quite as good, but there's lots of them. Okay? There's always people that can replace you. No one is irreplaceable in the economy. But every one of us is irreplaceable in our relationships, in our families, in our close social networks, our tribal networks, our kin networks. And that is where I think we need as a society to return our focus to. Build long-term friendships that go through the shit together. And I mean shit, okay? Where you can have a falling out, not talk to each other for 6 months and mend that fence, however dreadful it was. Because what's more dreadful is the erosion of all those social networks over time. I can see social destruction, social entropy occurring at a rate that I've never seen before in my life. Studied social science since I was 20, and it's unbelievable. I'm 55 now, so it's a long time of looking at these things, and it frightens me, okay? We're becoming increasingly a society of myopic, selfish individualists who don't have any understanding of either themselves or the people that they can and should be connected to. We're not connecting properly. We're not listening to each other. We're not truly trying to understand each other. It's all win-win-win competition. I love competition. I'm a highly competitive person, but there's a time to shut the fuck up and listen. And both men and women are not doing this. Okay? They're not listening, and they're not prepared to hear the things they don't want to hear. We need to be grown-ups. We need to mature as a species and stop trying to win. We win together. That's the only way we win. Civilization was built on people cooperating as much as they were competing. We need both elements to keep us ascending and spreading and growing. It can't be one or the other. But when we get out of whack and out of balance and it becomes hyper competitive or collectively hyper collaborative to the point where we have China and tyranny, okay, that's not good. We need that balance. Okay, and at the moment, I feel like we're out of whack in the West. Everyone's becoming hyper competitive and adversarial, and that doesn't work. I need to understand where you're coming from in order to be able to offer anything of value to you, and vice versa. Okay, in order to be able to understand what it is that I'm talking to, who it is that I'm talking to. Men and women are moving in divergent tracks now, and that's not good, that's bad. We've complemented each other for millions of years, and we need to continue to do that to build a civilization worth living in, that's pleasant to be in. And I don't see that until we can have these conversations. I don't have all the answers about it, but some conversations about how we build, when we study, when we do our careers. Personally, I think that women should be focusing predominantly, and young men with them, on building relationships earlier in life and building careers later. Why on earth? You can build a career at 30, 40, 50, 60. People do it all the time. You can't build a family past 35 easily at all, or at all in many cases. 50% of women at 30 are now childless. The projected cases, and they're very accurate with these projections, 80% of those women will never have children. That means close to 40% of women now will never breed and never produce children. That's a population crash. And if anyone thinks that's a good thing, you haven't done your homework. It's shocking, it's catastrophic. It's on the same scale as climate change or a jolly big rock hitting us from space. It's on that scale. We can't survive that without some drastic changes to society, and many changes which we won't like. So we need to address this, and I believe part of the issue is that men and women are growing apart. We're growing apart, we're over-competitive, and we're not listening and looking at each other, because that's what built our society. It wasn't built by tyranny and patriarchy. I'm sure those are features of it, but it was built by, even the patriarchy itself was built mainly on collaborative efforts. You can't make someone do something unless you're standing over them with a gun the whole time, which didn't happen for most of history. People had to trust each other that they would do their respective roles, that they would fulfill their respective duties, and that's how we grew into a society that can embrace more freedom and outgrow patriarchy, outgrow some of the more collectivist, authority-driven hierarchies, these deep authoritarian hierarchies. But we needed them for most of history. They were vital. We wouldn't be where we are without them. To outgrow them, we still need to respect them and understand the value in them, so we don't end up throwing the baby out with the bathwater, which we kind of socially are doing now, and economically too. It may suit the hegemons at the top of the oligopolies that we call economies now. It's not going to suit the rest of us at all. And if we don't want to live in, the movie Elysium, I suggest you watch it. If we don't want to end up in an Elysium-style economy, that's the worst-case scenario, I guess, but it's possible. Then we need to start thinking about how we live and how we relate to one another, because I still believe that relationships and the way that people talk to each other, the way that people organise themselves, is the core of everything. And at the moment, we're looking at a population crash that frightens me more than anything else. And we're looking at division between men and women right when we need unity, when we need coherence and a cohesive approach to the challenges that face us. We could be going into a golden age, we could be going into Elysium, and it's all up to us. I'm not sure what we do about these things, but isn't it worth having conversations about this? Isn't it worth looking into the data about this and discussing with each other how we resolve this? I think it's worth considering that young ladies, young women, whatever you want to use, okay, don't jump on my head for using some kind of patriarchal nom de plume, okay? Consider having relationships, looking for a permanent relationship earlier in life, post-uni for example, and producing children earlier in life, and having families earlier in life before they become too nailed down and rigid in their ways. And that's the same for guys too. Same for guys. Before we have gone out and potentially fucked 1 million people, had a dozen heartbreaks, been traumatized and ruined in some ways, and that's men and women, and then have to try and build a relationship on that amidst all the pressures I mentioned before, the socioeconomic pressures. I don't know if we're very good at that. I don't know if we're doing a very good job of that. And I think we do need to address the failures of the existing system as well as the strengths. Everyone wants to talk about the strengths of the sexual revolution and contraceptive pill and new economics and the new economic division of new international division of labour and new economics of globalisation. And yeah, they've been largely a success, but there's some real downsides to them too. And unless we talk about those as well, we're not going to be able to solve the problems that are emerging now that are very, very serious. These entropic cascades that we're falling into, they're almost unstoppable at a point, and we're not far from a point where some of them will be almost unstoppable, and we will reap a terrible economic and socioeconomic harvest from that. So let's try to consider talking to each other with a mind for the future, and not 5 years in the future, 10, 15, 20, 30, 40 years in the future. Think about your kids and your grandkids. We have to stop thinking just about ourselves, okay? In our own bellies. We've got to think about our children's bellies and our grandchildren's bellies and what they're going to be filled with and how they're going to live and what they're going to have as options for their life, because the decisions we make today affect them. And it's not just about the environment. You can't just cherry pick the choice. It's got to be everything broadly. And that means compromises. That means living with cons as well as pros. But we need to at least make conscious decisions about which cons we're willing to accept and which pros we're going to emphasize. Because at the moment, that's not the case. In fact, it's become an adversarial case through the culture wars. Fucking what a stupid idea. Culture at war with itself. I can't think of anything worse. Cancer in the body of the human species. It's cancer. We don't want culture wars. We want culture conversations, culture debates for sure. We want robust conversation, fearless conversation, fearless. Looking at the pros and the cons, looking at the things that really trouble us as honestly as possible and with as much information as possible, and being willing to sidestep and move and adjust with the data, not clinging rigidly to the feminist rhetoric or masculine rhetoric or whatever it is you want, whatever ideology or religion you cling to. Let it go and look at the facts. Become a Socratic society, a society that actually prides value in logic and reason right up there with empathy. Empathy is disastrous if you don't pair it with reason and evidence. It can become a tyranny all of its own. The greater good, ever hear that? Who's greater good? Kindness can create the worst cruelties. Many of the worst excesses of the Stalinist regime and the communist regimes were purported with benevolent intentions. Maoism, incredibly benevolent intentions. So no, having good intentions doesn't mean shit. Having a model that has, in theory, works but falls short in reality is terrible. We need to constantly be upgrading, constantly being mechanics in our society, and we need to do it together. Us.